No, hear me out, she said, amused at his apology. I was going to tell you that I would help you out. William looked surprised. This was the last thing that he had imagined would happen. What? You mean you are going to pretend to be Jenny? He said, shocked at her turnaround. Well, not quite, she answered. That wasn't quite what I had in mind, she said to a puzzled William. What could she mean? How would you like it if you became me for a while? How would you really like to become Jenny Wells? Somehow, Jenny managed to maintain her composure, despite the comical look of bewilderment on his face. I mean, this is for real. If you want to get yourself out of this mess, then you're going to have to become me for a while. Come with me. I want to show you something, she said as she led him towards a door in the hallway. William wanted to probe her, wanting to know what the hell she was talking about. He knew that he was not the biggest nor the most muscular man in the world, but there was no way that he would be able to pass as a girl, especially one nearly 10 years his junior. Besides, he had no desire to make himself look foolish by dressing himself up as a woman. I hope that you're open-minded. I think that what I am about to show you is going to blow your mind, she said excitedly, as she took out a large key and turned it in the lock that defended a large steel door. The door opened smoothly, and she reached into the room and pressed a switch that caused a battery of fluorescent lights to flicker on. This is it. This is the Shape and Mold VO2, or SAM2 to its friends, she said proudly, as William looked at a dull metal contraption that Jenny was pointing to. It resembled nothing more than a large refrigerator and looked decidedly low-tech. He finally found his voice again. What on earth is it, and what does it do? He asked her as she walked across to it. This is nothing less than your complete salvation, she said, continuing to answer his questions with riddles. This machine is going to change you into an exact duplicate of me. To all extents and purposes, you will become Jenny Wells. Her dramatic statement didn't have the effect that she had anticipated, as William didn't even try to disguise his laughter. She turned around, annoyed at his reaction and his dismissive attitude. Well, if you don't want me to help you out, then you might as well leave now. I thought that I was doing you a favor, she barked at him. William thought that he had better humor her. She seemed to be taking this seriously anyway. Okay, I'll buy what you're saying. Just how does it work? William asked as he saw her calming down. She still looked suspiciously at him, not convinced that he was being honest, but she decided to carry on anyway. She wanted this as much as him now. Well, to tell you the truth, I've only really managed to understand the basic principles and how to operate it. What makes it happen and why is beyond me. My father has always tried to keep this a secret, and I only stumbled on this by accident while he was away on one of his long visits away from home. I've read some of the books that my father has kept. They've been hidden away somewhere now, and they describe how it is possible to change the shape of any living human into that of any other, she said as William sat down on a chair beside the machine. Oh, come on! I've never heard of anything like this before." "If what you say is true, then how on earth has your father got hold of this? And how do you know it actually works?" he questioned her. "I have never found out what Dad does," she said, turning serious for a moment, as she contemplated something deep. "I also don't know how this got here, but I know it works because I've tried it." "You've tried it?" he asked skeptically. "And what happened?" "I managed to change myself into another woman. I don't know who she was, but I found her pattern stored inside Sam2's memory bank and preset the controls according to the manual. It took about 2 days to complete. I must admit I hadn't been ready for that. But when I came to, I found that I'd become a 30-year-old woman." "Didn't anyone miss you for those 2 days?" William asked her. "Dad was out on one of his trips, and Samuel decided to leave me on my own for a few days, while he went on a weekend trip with his mates," she said with a tone of resignation. "It's not that uncommon, you know. I'm often left to fend for myself." "Anyway," she continued, "Sam2 can either capture the pattern from a person's body and change it at a later date, or it can take 2 people at a time and alter both of them. It seems that if 2 people want to straight swap between them, then it doesn't need to store their patterns. At least, that is what it said in the manual." "Pardon me for saying this, but don't you seem to know a lot for a 16-year-old girl?" he said, trying his best not to sound too patronizing. She didn't look annoyed at his comment, just a little sad as her eyes hardened. "Oh, believe me, I have had plenty of time to take this all in. When we first got here, I had no friends and nothing to do. Yes, I had plenty of time." William looked at her serious face and his heart went out to her. He could tell that she was telling him the truth. He just knew it with every instinct in his body. She went on to describe the process that had been outlined in the manual, describing how it could alter every single cell within a body until it conformed to what had been programmed to resemble. It seemed that the critical issue in the process was the distribution of mass. If a person transformed into a pattern for someone with a lesser density rating, then the superfluous mass would disappear entirely, with no side effects. The key danger was in trying to change into someone with a greater density than that of the original host. A 130 bullets person changing to a 180 bullet person would result in a very unstable new body structure, which could leave them in a critical state. So, what if you have 2 individuals with a different mass or density? How would it affect them? William asked, as he started to forget his initial skepticism. "That's okay, as long as it is retained within SAM2 during the process. Then it will add or subtract the extra mass according to the pattern," she replied, with a maturity that belied her young years. "Okay, so let's say you can do this to me. How is the world going to cope with 2 Jenny Wells in the world, and how long would I stay that way?" he asked, the idea starting to intrigue him. Jenny paused for a second, looking at him with a steely gaze, almost daring him to protest. "Well, I think it's only fair that if you are going to become me for a while, then I thought that I might become you. It might benefit us both, you know, like taking a vacation." The air was electric as they both stared at each other, both excited at what they were considering. "Okay, you're on," he replied, knowing full well that this was turning into a meeting with destiny for him. He wasn't sure that he could have refused, even if he had wanted to. They had agreed that they would attempt their transformation on the following weekend. Jenny's father wasn't due back until the Tuesday after that, and Jenny knew that Samuel had scheduled a weekend trip away with his girlfriend. This would give them a whole week to exchange details about each other's lives and to make any other preparations that they might need. William arranged to have a couple of days off from work, ostensibly due to medical problems, so that Jenny would have at least one whole day to get used to being a man before she had to resume his life. William was an avid student of Jenny's personal details. By the time Saturday came around again, he knew every intimate detail of her life. It was like living out his cyber-based alter ego, but this time the end result would buy reality, not just a dream. The only part of being Jenny that he felt uncomfortable with was when he found out she had a casual boyfriend. He hoped that he would be able to avoid him for the brief time that he would be Jenny. He didn't know if he wanted to be Jenny to that extent. William had spent the week trying to keep out of trouble at work during the day, and the evenings chatting with Sandra. She had been getting really excited with her trip that was just a few days away now, and William was also anticipating the following week with relish, but for not quite the same reasons. His intense studies of Jenny's life had added even greater authenticity to his alter ego. And spiritually, he almost felt like a girl already. Saturday morning arrived, and William was knocking on Jenny's house at 9 a.m., just as they had agreed, and only had to wait a moment until Jenny opened the door. Their greetings were merely cursory, both eager to get on with what needed to be done. They went downstairs to the secret basement, and William wasn't surprised to find that the door was already open, and that she had already been preparing Sam too so that it would be warmed and ready. He was still a little surprised that such a pretty girl would want to be turned into an older man, but was soon pulled up short when he voiced these thoughts aloud. "Look, I was about to say that it was none of your business, but I suppose it is really. Let's just say that my life is far from ideal, and I could do with a break from it. Besides, you're pretty good looking, or will be once I get hold of your body," she said, trying to add a touch of levity to her earlier comment. She led him over to the machine and opened a pair of doors to show 2 compartments, each comprising of a padded area big enough to contain someone up to about 7 feet tall. "Okay, you're going to have to take your clothes off and lie yourself down. Don't worry, it's very comfortable. It has to be when you're spending 2 days in the thing," she said as William looked nervous. "Take my clothes off, here, in front of you," he exclaimed. "Oh, for goodness sake, I will see everything that you've got in a couple of days' time, and you will see everything I have got. Let's just get on with it. Here, I'll start," she said, unbuttoning her blouse. He would have felt even more stupid if he had failed to follow her lead now, and quickly removed his clothing, trying to cover his erection with his hands. "Now you lie back there," she said, leading him towards the left-hand compartment, "while I go in here. Now relax, it's due to kick in about a minute's time," she said as she closed the lid on them both, wondering what it would feel like to have an erection soon herself. Bang on time, A smooth, inaudible vibration could be felt coursing through the machine, and William wondered if he was actually sane for even contemplating this. Still, it was too late to back out now. There was nothing else to indicate that anything was happening at all, apart from a strange, tingling sensation spreading throughout his body, a bit like pins and needles, and William lost all track of time as his earlier excitement faded into boredom. The time it took for Sam 2 to weave, its magic seemed interminable, and although William felt sure that he had slept at some point, he couldn't be sure. He tried to move his hands just to reassure himself that he was still alive, but found that he was still frozen. He was aware that something felt different about him, but despite knowing what was happening to him, he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. His tranquility was broken by a loud hissing noise, and he was dazzled by a sudden bright light as the lid to his compartment opened. "Oops, sorry. I should have turned the lighting down a little." He heard a voice that he didn't recognize say. There was something familiar about it, and he pressed his eyes with his hands, trying to clear his vision, and groaned. That was the first moment that he had been aware of that something had changed in him. His hands felt so soft and slender, and the skin around his eyes felt delicate. He knew then that their change must have been successful. That must have been his old body's voice that he heard. He finally managed to focus on what was in front of him, and was not surprised to see his own face staring at him with a big grin plastering its face. "Come on, Jenny, let me help you out of there. I set my own compartment to open about 10 minutes before yours. I've been through this before and knew what to expect," the new William said as he eased her out of the compartment and into the room. William groaned again as he saw what had been himself standing there, looking him/her up and down. He noticed that Jenny was fully clothed in what he had been wearing when he had arrived here, and she suddenly felt vulnerable and exposed at being naked in front of a man. Where did you put your clothes?" she asked, fascinated by the soft, lilting tone his new voice possessed. "Oh, sorry. I should have thought. Here they are," Jenny said as she handed him the clothing she had arrived in, and smiled to her/himself as he watched the girl turn around in an attempt to preserve her modesty, noting the typically feminine gesture. The new William confirmed that it was Monday now, and suggested they had something to eat to keep their strength up before they took up their new and temporary lives. While they were eating, he warned Jenny that her brother would be home this afternoon, so she'd better start getting used to being called Jenny now, so that she didn't act out of character. They finished their breakfast and William left, leaving Jenny to get used to her new self. Jenny, as she was mentally referring to herself already, went up into her room. She was eager to explore herself and wanted privacy. She didn't want her brother to turn up unexpectedly to find her feeling herself up or anything. Every step that she took revealed a new marvel to she who had been William, from the lightness of her body as she went up the stairs, to the sway of her breasts. It was all new and exciting. As soon as she entered her room, which William had showed her earlier, she started to remove her clothes, feeling a little guilty and a bit like a peeping Tom, but not enough to overcome her curiosity. The blouse came off first, and Jenny looked wondrously at the full breasts that were topped by a light brown aureole and large nipples. She cupped her hands under her breasts, feeling their weight and movement, and as she ran the palms of her hand over her nipples, she marveled at their sensitivity. The reflection in the mirror showed a slender waist that flared out to hips that were slightly too wide, but deliciously sensuous. She pulled down her panties and jeans and stepped out of them before, once again, looking at the mirror. She looked at the small covering of hair over her groin and then pulled her legs apart slightly to give herself a view of the expected cleft that she now had. She reached out with her slim hand and let her fingers pull the folds of the outer covering of her vagina apart, examining herself more closely, and ran a finger inside the soft inner skin where she knew her clitoris would be. It was nothing like what she had read in those stories that she had become addicted to. There was no great overpowering feeling of sexual ecstasy. There was really nothing more than the pleasurable feeling she had been used to get when she had felt her limp penis before she had changed. She guessed that if she were really aroused, then it would be different, and would experiment a little to see if she could become turned on. Having finished her explorations, she looked in Jenny's cupboards to find something different to wear. She felt like having the whole girl experience and looked for a short skirt and something a little more revealing to wear up top. She had just finished dressing and had managed to perform a passable makeup job when she heard the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. Sis, are you home?" She heard a young man's voice call out. She hoped that this was her brother. Yes, she stuttered nervously. "I'm in my bedroom." "Okay, see you later then. I'm just going to take Carol home," he replied. She assumed that this was his girlfriend. After that, everything seemed pretty normal, except that this time it was from a new perspective. She looked forward to Sandra's arrival tomorrow. She knew that she would liven things up a bit, if even half of her tales that she had shared on the chat line were to be believed. With it still being midsummer, Jenny had no school to go to, but still woke up early anyway. She stretched her arms and felt the movement from her chest and smiled to herself. Her first whole day as a girl, she was going to enjoy this. She wondered what time Sandra would get here and knew that she would have to make up the foldable spare bed that the former Jenny said she should use for her friend. She got out of bed and pulled the gusset of her panties free from where it had rode up into the crack of her bottom during the night. It felt so strange to have no accompanying movement from anything down there. As she pulled it, and she felt free as a bird as she sat on the toilet and emptied her bladder. That was something that she was already getting used to. After finishing her ablutions, she went downstairs to get something to eat, only to find that her brother was already in there and just finishing his toast. "Morning, sis," he said rather more pleasantly than she would have imagined. "I've got to go out to pick up Carol. Don't forget to get the laundry done. It's beginning to stack up a little," he finished as he picked up his jacket and walked towards the door. Jenny was dumbfounded and called after him. "Hey, that's not fair. Why don't you do it? Why me?" He just turned around and looked after, amused by this show of female rebellion. "Don't be stupid, you know the deal. Dad's out doing something extremely important and hasn't got time, and I just don't that sort of thing. It's woman's work, and you're a woman," he snorted at her. Jenny just stood and looked at his departing figure. She had nothing to say as the realities of being female started to come home to her in a way she hadn't imagined. It was just assumed that she would perform these menial tasks. An hour and a half later, she was out in the garden, hanging out the washing to dry in the morning sunshine. She had cursed William for leaving her with this chore, but calmed down a little when she realized that she had most probably been busy setting up SM2, and also had a sneaking suspicion that this had been left as a sort of initiation for her. Besides, it hadn't really been that hard, and she had enjoyed the fresh smell of these clothes in the outdoors. She picked up the empty washing basket and started to walk back indoors when she had the feeling that she was being watched. She stopped and looked back to her old house to see her old body waving to her, bare from the waist upwards. She had to laugh and waved back, hoping that William would enjoy himself in the next couple of days. This concludes part 3 of the story. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned and consider supporting us on Patreon or YouTube for early access to subsequent parts.